Grading Turnitin assignments in Brightspace, Part 3. Hello and welcome back to Part 3 of our series on Turnitin assignments in Brightspace. This is Professor Valerie Pell from Wilbur Wright College, one of the city colleges of Chicago, and I'll be your host for this training session. In this installment, we will focus on some ways to troubleshoot if Brightspace and Turnitin are not syncing properly. I'll offer you three troubleshooting scenarios involving grades not syncing between Turnitin and Brightspace, and I will show you how to overcome those situations. Because the Brightspace team cannot anticipate every single possible syncing scenario, it's likely you may encounter a situation that's slightly different from these that we're offering. Nevertheless, we're hopeful that these troubleshooting steps will likely resolve your particular issue. Now, let's begin. Training assumptions. For today's training, the Brightspace team is making some assumptions about trainees. First, we assume that you've completed the foundations training. Next, we assume that you've completed parts 1 and part 2 of the Turnitin assignments in Brightspace series. And finally, we assume that you have a desire for troubleshooting knowledge in Turnitin and Brightspace. Part 3 agenda. Here's our agenda for Part 3 of the Turnitin assignment troubleshooting training session. In this session, you will review how to check if automatically sync grades is enabled. You'll also learn how to troubleshoot grades not syncing by publishing feedback. You'll also learn how to troubleshoot grades not syncing by using the Turnitin refresh function. And finally, we'll also learn to troubleshoot grades not syncing by using the Turnitin, quote, use this score, unquote, function. Check automatically sync before students submit work. Check automatically sync grades in Turnitin. As you may recall from previous training sessions, if you want grades to flow from Turnitin to Brightspace, you must ensure that automatically sync grades is enabled in Turnitin. To take this a step further, it's extremely important that this is set up before students begin submitting work to Turnitin for grades to filter properly. In this section of the presentation, we will review how to check if automatically sync grades is enabled in Turnitin. Check automatically sync grades. The first step of this workflow is to return to the Assessments drop-down arrow. Once you've revealed the drop-down menu for Assessments, click Assignments. In the Submission Folders area, click the drop-down arrow next to the title of the assignment. The drop-down menu will appear. Then choose Edit the Assignment. In the Edit Submission Folder area, click on the Turnitin tab all the way to the right. We are now in the Turnitin integration page. Check to see if Automatically Syncs Grades is selected. If it isn't, select that option. Then click Save and Close. Automatically Sync Grades Note. I do want to mention that if student papers have already been submitted to Turnitin through Brightspace, changing this setting will likely have no effect on your workflow. Automatically sync grades must be enabled before students submit work for the sync to function properly. If students have submitted their papers already, you will likely have to troubleshoot the syncing error you encounter in one of the other ways mentioned in this training video. Nevertheless, knowing whether or not you initially enabled Turnitin to sync automatically is helpful for future reference, and it may narrow down your troubleshooting options. Turnitin and Brightspace grades not synced. Scenario 1, publish feedback. Turnitin and Brightspace grades not synced. Scenario 1, publish feedback. In Scenario 1, we will have the following assumptions. First, you have graded all submitted work in TurnItIn. Next, you check to see if Automatically Sync was selected, and it was selected. Next, grades appear in TurnItIn, but grades don't appear in Brightspace Grades. The solution for this scenario is to publish feedback. In Scenario 1, the TurnItIn score is showing in the assignment submission folder. However, when we check the status of multiple papers, they don't say that the scores are published. Instead, they might say things like draft saved, or they might say nothing at all. Because there are multiple statuses showing, we know that we need to publish feedback so students can see it. Select students by clicking the boxes next to their names or the top box to select them all. Then click Publish Feedback. When I click Publish Feedback, a pop-up window will appear asking me if I really want to publish this feedback. I will click Yes to publish the feedback. Check the gradebook. Now that we've published grades, you'll notice that the status is changed for each student. Now we need to go to the gradebook to make sure that they filtered over. So we'll return to the Assessments drop-down and choose Grades. In the gradebook, I'm now in the Brightspace gradebook. Notice that I'm viewing this information from the Enter Grades tab at the top. When I scroll over, you can see that the scores of the two students I assessed are in the gradebook. You'll also notice that the assignment icon doesn't have a red circle, so you can be sure that I marked them as red. Now, you might also be looking at this and wondering about Maureen. Well, Maureen didn't submit this assignment, so I could go in now and add a 0 here in the gradebook, but I'll skip that step for now. TurnItIn and Brightspace grades not synced. Scenario 2, refresh TurnItIn. TurnItIn and Brightspace grades not synced. Scenario 2, refresh TurnItIn. In Scenario 2, we will have the following assumptions. First, grading was already completed in TurnItIn. Next, you have double-checked and Automatically Sync was selected. Then, some grades, but not all, don't appear in TurnItIn. Also, some grades, but not all, don't appear in Brightspace grades. The solution in this scenario is to click the Refresh TurnItIn and Publish Grades buttons. In Scenario 2, your assignment submission folder might look something like this. Some grades appear in TurnItIn. However, some students don't have grades listed at all. To fix this, you could try using the Refresh TurnItIn button in the grade mark area. The Refresh button has two circular arrows similar to a recycling logo. When you click the refresh arrows, a score should filter over from TurnItIn. Then you can select the students you've refreshed and then click Publish Feedback. Check the gradebook. Now that we've published grades, you'll notice that the status has changed for each student. Now we'll go to the gradebook to make sure that they filtered over. So we'll return to the Assessments drop-down and choose Grades. In the gradebook, I'm now back in the Brightspace gradebook. Notice that I'm viewing this information from the Enter Grades tab at the top. When I scroll over, you can see that the scores of the two students I assessed are in the gradebook. It is now filtered over and the feedback has been published. TurnItIn and Brightspace grades not synced. Scenario 3, use this score. TurnItIn and Brightspace grades not synced. Scenario 3, use this score. In Scenario 3, you'll see that there's a variety of assumptions. This scenario is the widest of all. It's kind of a catch-all. So, what we assume about this is that your assignments were graded in TurnItIn. Next, automatically sync was, or maybe it wasn't selected. It doesn't really matter for this scenario to work. Then, grades may appear, or maybe they don't appear in TurnItIn. It really doesn't matter for this scenario to work. Also, grades don't appear in Brightspace grades. That's important. Additionally, feedback may or may not have been published. Finally, the solution in this fast scenario is to use the, quote, use this score, unquote, TurnItIn functionality for each individual student. To begin this workflow, return to the Assignment Submission folder and click on the submission title of any one of your submissions. We are now in the Brightspace grading interface. Notice that the student's paper has loaded. Also notice that no score has filtered over into the Brightspace grading area. We need to be able to see if the TurnItIn score filtered over from TurnItIn at all. To do that, we need to close the student's paper, because right now it's kind of in our way. To do that, click on the X above the student's paper. After clicking on the X, notice that the student's paper has disappeared. We now only have the condensed information about the paper. The next thing to notice is that there is a TurnItIn grade mark area. This is really important because it has some buttons we're going to be using. Notice, though, that no TurnItIn score filtered back from TurnItIn. To fix this, we'll try using the refresh button in TurnItIn with the two circular arrows, kind of like the recycling sign. Once we've refreshed TurnItIn, the TurnItIn score has filtered over from TurnItIn. But you may also notice that the Brightspace score remains empty. In this case, click on the TurnItIn heading entitled Use This Score. When you click TurnItIn's Use This Score button, the score from TurnItIn is then linked to the Brightspace Grades area. Once the score is showing in Brightspace Grades, scroll down to the Publish button at the bottom of the screen. Then, scroll up or down to choose Next Student in the navigation area. You will then need to click Use the Score and save for each student in your queue. Now that we've published the grades individually by using the Use This Score button for each student, the status should have changed for each of your students. Now we need to go to the gradebook to ensure that the grades fully have filtered over. So we'll return to the Assessments drop-down window and choose Grades. I'm now in the Brightspace gradebook. Notice that I'm viewing the information from the Enter Grades tab at the top. When I scroll over, you can see that the scores of the two students I assessed are in the gradebook. The Use This Score function has worked properly, and now the grades and TurnItIn are both synced. Troubleshooting recap. Always remember to check whether or not automatically sync grades to Brightspace is enabled before students submit your work. 2. If grades are not syncing properly, check whether or not you've published grades. 3. Or try refreshing TurnItIn. And 4. If grades are not synced, try using the, quote, use this score, unquote, functionality for each student to manually sync the TurnItIn scores with a Brightspace gradebook. Thank you for joining me again today. If you have any questions about this presentation or Brightspace in general, please contact your local faculty champion, your local technology integration specialist, or the CCC Help Desk. This is Professor Valerie Powell signing off. I hope you have another bright day using TurnItIn in Brightspace.